Moed Katan Daf contains two primary sugyas. The Gemara begins a discussion of clearing out and digging new water channels. The Gemara will have a halacha to limit the halacha in our Mishnah, and the Gemara will have a number of brises which may contradict it, and the Gemara will try to resolve them all. Then the Gemara moves on to the halacha of marking graves so that people don't step on them while they're reading Truma. The Gemara will have 10 sources for that halacha, and then the Gemara will get into the details of which graves you need to mark, which types of tumah need to be marked, and which you do not. So let's begin. So first of all, we've seen in our Mishnah that you can clean out a stuffed up water channel, but you cannot dig a new water channel. So that's called chatita and chafira. Chatita is cleaning out, that you can do. Creating a new one, chafira, that you're not allowed to do. Says now the Gemara limits this halacha. Rav Yaakov says in the name of Rav Yochanan that it's only true if it is not necessary for Yantif. If the tzibor, if the rabbim do not require a new water channel for Yantif. If, however, you do need a new water channel for Yantif, then you are allowed to dig a new one, and therefore it's permitted both to do chatita and chafira if it's needed. Alright, the Gemara has a kasha on this. The Gemara says they have a brisa that clearly shows that that's not true. The brisa says, whether you're an individual or a rabbim, you're allowed to clear out water channels, and you're not allowed to dig new water channels. So it says clearly only chatita is permitted and not chafira. Now, the Gemara says, well, that's simple. I'll tell you that's talking about where we don't need it. And that's what our Mishnah was referring to, and that's why it said that chatita is permitted and not chafira. The Gemara says it can't be talking about where it's not needed, because it says that an individual is allowed to do chatita. And we know that the halacha is that an individual is not allowed to do chatita unless it's needed. How do we know that? So the Gemara quotes its first brisa, and this is already the second brisa. The brisa says that an individual is not allowed to do chatita. Only a rabbim is allowed to do chatita. Now this contradicts what we said. We said in our Mishnah and in our second brisa and in our first brisa that an individual is allowed to do chatita. The only way to resolve that is to say that the individual is allowed to do chatita, is allowed to clear out the channel when he needs it. When he doesn't need it, then he's not allowed to. When he needs a feyantef, that is. So if that's the case, then our first brisa, which we had asked our kasha from, has to be talking about where it's needed. And yet it clearly said that the only situation in which you're allowed to clear out is chatita. You're not allowed to dig new ones. So therefore, it's clear there that even the rabbim there, where it says that you're only allowed to clear out, you're not allowed to dig new ones, it's talking about where the rabbim needs it, and yet it is still forbidden to dig a new one. And therefore you have a kasha on the halacha. The Gemara has said that the rabbim is allowed to dig a new one you are allowed to dig a new one for the tzarchi rabbim. So Gemara says, but the way you want to set this up has to be wrong, because they have a third brisa. And this third brisa says that the rabbim is allowed to dig a new channel. Well, it says clearly the rabbim is allowed to dig one. According to the way you want to set up the original brisa, it has to be referring to where you do need it and still it's aser. So this case here, where is it going to be permitted exactly? Even when the rabbim needs a new one, according to the way you want to learn the brisa, it's aser. Here we have a brisa that clearly says that digging a new channel is permitted in some cases. It's got to be where it's needed. How else are you going to work it out? So Gemara says, well, then we have a kasha with our first brisa against the second brisa. So it's either the first brisa doesn't fit with the second brisa, doesn't fit with the third brisa. What are we going to do? So Gemara says we have to work out all the halachos together, and we'll explain the original brisa as follows. We'll start off as follows. It says that an individual is allowed to do chatita, is allowed to clear out a stuffed up channel if he needs it. The rabbim is certainly allowed to do it, is allowed to clear out, do chatita if they need it, because the rabbim is even allowed to do chafira if they need it. However, the rabbim is not allowed to do chafira, is not allowed to dig a new channel if they don't need it. Certainly the yachid is not allowed to do chafira if they don't need it, because the yachid is not even allowed to do chatita if they don't need it. What do we end up with this? Well, we end up by reading this into the words of the brisa, is that all cases of needed you're allowed to do chatita, chafira for a rabbim, and chatita even for a yachid. All cases of not needed you're not allowed to do chafira for a yachid or a rabbim, and chatita even for the yachid. The one case that's not discussed is chatita where it is not needed for the rabbim, and chafira where it is needed for the yachid. But the Gemara doesn't refer to that. So anyway, so we've worked out all these halachos, and now we've established, like we originally said, our original assumption, that you are allowed to do chafira, l'tzarchei rabbim, if the rabbim need it. You're allowed to dig a new channel. So the Gemara says you can actually see this from the Mishnah itself. Our Mishnah had said after it listed all the things you're allowed to do, it said you're allowed to do kol tzarchei rabim, extra kol, inclusive word, must be including something, must be including this, that you're allowed to dig if the rabbin need a new water channel. So as the Gemara, that's not necessarily what it means. Maybe it just means halachas that we've seen in a brisa. You go out to take thorns off the road so people shouldn't scratch themselves. You fix up the streets. You clear away the mud. You clear through streets. You clean up and you fix mikvahs. Any mikvah which doesn't have 40 sa, you direct the stream to flow into it so that it's full. You take care of all these publicly needed facilities. So says the Gemara, so that's what it's referring to. Now, that brisa adds another thing. It says, how do you know that if you don't do all these things for the rabbim, that somebody who hurts themselves, that it's your fault? Because the Torah says, V'haya alecha damim. It says, V'lei shafich dam naki b'kerev ha'artzecha, sh'alash megacha no'isein lecha, nachla, v'haya alecha damim. The blood will be upon you. If you didn't take care of the public things and somebody gets hurt because of it, it's your fault. Okay. So anyway, so what we see from here is that we have all these other things that we do, and that's what's included in the Mishnah. It says the Gemara, that's not correct, because the Mishnah itself explicitly says those things. In the next phrase, it says you clean up the mikvahs, you clean up the roads, and you fix all these things. So it's definitely not referring to that. So the extra call, what's it referring to? It must be referring to chafira, digging a new water channel, and that's a good proof. So the Gemara leaves it at that. Okay, now we go on to the halachas of marking graves. So you've seen in the Mishnah that one of the public service things we do, which you're even allowed to do on Yom Tov, is you're allowed to mark graves. You have a grave or something that is tamei in the ground. You don't want people to step on it with their truma. So you have to mark it so that people can see where it is. Now the Gemara says, what is the source? What is a hint? Says the Gemara. Somewhere in the Torah where it says you're supposed to mark graves. So the Gemara is going to give 10 sources here. It'll challenge the first two. So the first one, the Gemara brings a pasuk in Yecheskel which says, "Vera etzem adam ubana etzlo tziyah." You'll see the bone of a person, and you build a marker near it. Now, that's only a hint, because that's not really what the pasuk is talking about. It's not telling you to go do that. It's a prediction to how people will be sensitive in the future in times of Mashiach. But so there's a hint, though, that you should mark a grave or a source of tumah that you find. So Gemara asks, Ravina asked, Rav Ashi, but that's from Yecheskel. So how did we know before Yecheskel came along? Gemara says that's not a problem. We knew it from Halacha Moshe Misinei before Yecheskel came along. Yecheskel just gave it a pasuk, and we find that in other halachas as well. Such a thing. For example, we have a halacha that a person who didn't have a bris milah because of a medical condition is not allowed to serve in the Beis Hamikdash. And we asked, what's the source for that? And we gave a pasuk in Yecheskel called Ben Enechar Aral Leva Aral Ambasar La Yavai El Mikdashi L'Sharseni. All right, but so you could ask the same thing. How did you know before Yecheskel came along? We knew from Halacha Moshe Misinei, and Yecheskel gave it a pasuk specifically. All right, now the Gemara gives another source for halacha that you mark graves. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Yavo. It says the fact that it says in the Parsha of Mitzorah, Tamei Tamei Yikra. Tamei Tamei should call out. That means that the Tumah should call out to warn people and tell them stay away. So just like the Mitzorah calls it out, the grave itself should call out. There should be a marker there that announces to people. The Gemara says Rav Uziel, the grandson of another Rabbi Uziel, the great one, Rabbi Uziel Rabbah, he said this just as well, that the Tumah should call out and tell people to stay away. So Gemara asks, what do you mean? That pasuk is not extra. That's needed for the Mitzorah to tell people to stay away from him, and to tell people that he is Tamei, he's a Mitzorah, so that people should be misfal. They should do tevilah for him, that he should be cured of his tzaras. So Gemara says, if that was the only meaning of the pasuk, you could just say Tamei Yikar. You could just say once. You could just say call out Tamei. Why does it have to say Tamei Yikar? That's to include two things. Both that person, the Mitzorah, and the grave, that should also announce. Or now the Gemara gives a number of other general sources that you should keep people away from sins and Aveira. Abaye says, it says, Lefnei Ivelo Sitain Michshol, you should not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. That means you have to make it clear where a grave is, that people shouldn't step on it and end up being over Aveiros. Our Papa says, it says, Solu Panu Derech, move away, clear away, make a road. So that we want it to be clear where people can travel. So we clear away obstacles that people won't know where to go. Make sure that it's clear where they need to go. Reb Chanina says it's from Harivu Michshel Miderech Ami, remove the stumbling block from the way of my people, make the road clear. Shubay Davidi says it's from V'hodatel Hemes Derech HaShayel Chuba. You should let them know which way they should go. Again, clarify where there's tumah, where there isn't. Mazutra says it's from V'hizartem Es Beisam Mitumasam. You should warn or keep away Bnei Yisrael from their tumah. Rav Ashi says it's from Mishmartem Es Mishmarti. You should make a rule, you should make a protection for my mishmeres, for my rules. Rashi says mishmeres is a word that's used in the context of tumah, so here we're saying make a protection for my tumah. Ravina says it's from Visam Derech Harenu B'Yasha Elokim, a pasuk in the Tehillim. I will place a road, and then I will see the salvation of Hashem. So you should place a road. You should make it clear where you can go and where you can't. Now, the Gemara quotes Rishul ben Levi has a drasha on that pasuk. He says, "Kol hasam or chosav," but he reads it as hasham or chosav. Anyone who calculates his ways, Rashi says it means that he does what it says in Avos. He calculates the gain of an avera versus its loss, the loss of a mitzvah versus its gain. If you do all those things, so then he will see the salvation of Kadosh Baruch Hu. What's the source? This pasuk, Visam Derech Arenim B'Yash Elokim, he says, read it as Visham Derech, one who calculates, one who evaluates the way, will see the salvation of Hashem. Gemara quotes a story on the topic. Rav Yanai had a Talmud who used to ask him kashas all the time, but when he gave shir on Shabbos of a regel, he did not ask any kashas because there were a lot of people there, and he did not want to embarrass Rav Yanai. So Rav Yanai said to this person, you can apply the pasuk of Visam Derech Harenu B'Yash Elokim, that he calculates, again using it as Visham, he calculates the right time to do things and times that you should not do things. All right, now the Gemara goes into the topic of what should you mark. What type of things need to be marked? The Gemara quotes a Brisa. The Brisa says you do not mark a kizayis from the dead, even though a kizayis size flesh from the dead is mitame, but it doesn't apparently give tumas oel. And we'll question that later. But you shouldn't mark just a kizayis of flesh from the dead. A bone the size of a barley you don't have to mark. And not any other thing which is not mitame bal doesn't create tumah within a room that it spreads to everything under that roof together with it. So this seems to indicate the rule of what you need to mark as anything that is tumas oel. If somebody steps on the grave, will get tumas oel by stepping on it. Again, he's not going to move it. He's not going to touch it, but he will be over it, so he will get tumas oel. So the only things you need to mark, and therefore kizayis and etzem kaseora you don't have to mark because it doesn't have tumas oel. Okay, what should you mark? What does have tumas oel? So the Gemara says the spine, that is the majority of the body, and therefore it has tumas oel. A skull, that also. The majority of the volume of the bones of the body, that's if you have a few bones, but they're very large bones, so it's the majority of the volume. Or the majority of the number of bones, that is if you have a lot of small bones, it may not be the majority of the volume, but it is the majority of the number of bones. So you got to mark all those things. Okay, the Brisa continues, you don't have to mark a well-known certain grave, people know where that is, but you do have to mark a suffix, an area where you're not sure exactly where the grave is. Anything which is in the suffix zone, you need to mark. Now the Brisa lists 3 sfeikos, schachos, peros, and besa pras. And Gemara will describe what these 3 things are. Now, the Brisa continues and says, don't put the marker directly over the tumah because people won't see it on time and they'll end up stepping on it. So you got to put it a little far away, some distance before in all the directions of advance. And don't put it too far away because then you're going to end up with too big a zone that's blocked off from travel because of tumah. You're going to end up having big parts of Eretz Yisrael that are not transversible. So don't put it too far away. All right, the Gemara begins and it asks, first of all, why are you telling me that a kizayis of the dead does not have tumas oel? It's not true. Everybody that says these are the things which are matami tumas oel. And the first thing on the list is a kizayis of the dead. So Rav Papa says, you're right. Kizayis of the dead does transform to tumas oel. Here we're talking about where you have an exact kizayis. It's going to disintegrate pretty quickly and have less than the share of a kizayis. So we say don't mark it now because if you mark it, the marker is going to stay. And what's going to end up happening is that people are going to think that there is real full-size tumah there, and they'll end up being matami when they accidentally step on it, and they'll burn a taharas on that. You'd rather have it unmarked, and then once or twice somebody will step on it, even though he's tumah, he won't know, and you'll have to come and end up burning taharas when he finds out. Rather have that happen once or twice, rather than for all time it'll be marked, and the tumah won't be there anymore because it'll be less than the kazayas, because part of it will have disintegrated. All right. Now, the Mishnah, that is the Brisa, had said these are the sfeikos, schachos, peros, and besa pras. So what are these things? So schachos, the Gemara says, is a tree which has a large branch covering, and we don't know where under the tree is the tumah specifically, so you need to mark that. It's under there somewhere. Peros is rocks that stick out of a wall, that again, they cover a large area. You don't know where the grave is or the tumah is under that. And a besa pras is a field which was plowed, and there was a grave in there somewhere, and now you don't know what happened to the bones. Now, how much becomes tummy when you plow a field that had a grave in it? So it's the entire furrow of your plow, 100 amos long. You could assume that it's spread all the way to the end of 100 amos, and therefore any direction that the plow dug a furrow over the grave spreads the bones to 100 amos, and that all becomes usher as a besa pras. All right, now the more questions. Are you sure that a basic process is matame? But if somebody steps in a basic process, is he really tamei tumas? It's not true. Rabbi Yehuda says if somebody is allowed to go through a basic process, he does not become tamei as long as he blows the ground in front of him. So if he'll blow any actual bones out of the way, so he can make sure that he's not stepping on a clear bone, anything which is under the ground is not matame him. He's even allowed to go walk there and do his carbon pesach, which he's not allowed to do if he's tamei. So the Gemara answers that it's not a kasha. There's different types of beis hapras. There's a beis hapras which is a field that was plowed over, and there's a beis hapras where there's a grave in there and we don't know where it is. It's within there somewhere. Both of these cases, you have tumma in a field and you don't know where, but one, it's because it got scattered, and the other is because it's just unknown. It's missing. So in a case where it is plowed over and scattered there, it's not metame tumas ol. You could assume that the plow broke up the bones and scattered it away. You do have to just blow the ground in front of you to make sure that you're not stepping on one. If though the grave is lost in here somewhere, that grave is definitely metame tumas ol. You have to make sure you don't step on it. You can't walk in there, and if you do, you will become tamei misafik. Okay, now says the Gemara, there are three types of a beis hapras. There is a field that you don't know where the grave is a field that was plowed over, and there's something called the crying field, the field of the criers. So what's that? So Marcos the Rav Yeshua bar Abba says the name of Ula. That's the place where when you're doing a funeral, that's where the people hand over the coffin or the beer from the family to the people who are going to do the actual kfur themselves. And there the family turns around and they leave. And the people who are going to continue pick it up and they carry it forward and they do the actual burial in the cemetery. Now, Gemara asks, why is that place tamei? So Gemara says the reason they stopped there is probably because, or possibly because, a limb, an aver or two, fell off the mace and it was lost, and therefore they stopped there. And maybe they'll even do the kfur there. So you have a limb that's lost and you don't know where it is, somewhere in that field. All right, now the Gemara asks, is it true that a plowed over field does not have to be marked? We said that a plowed field is not the type of field that has to be marked. That's not the beis hapras you need to worry about. It's not matame ba'ol. The only type of field that's matame ba'ol, which is a beis hapras, is one that has a grave in it somewhere we don't know where. The Gemara says we have a brisa that says if you find a field that's marked as a beis hapras, and you don't know what type of field is this? Is this a plowed field or is this a field that has a grave in it? Now, if it has a field that has a grave in it, you can't walk through there. If it is a plowed field, then you could walk through there. You just have to blow the ground to make sure you don't step on a bone. So, which is it? So the Gemara says that. So this brisa says if you have trees in the field, then you could assume that it was plowed because people often plow tree orchards. It helps the trees grow. So probably it was plowed. That's why it became a beis hapras, not just that there was a grave lost. Now, in that brisa, Rabbi Yehuda argues, and he says you have to have somebody standing there, a zaken, an elderly person, or a talmid chacham, in order to tell you, I know what happened there. You can't just rely on an assumption that if there's trees, it was plowed. But anyway, what we see from here is that even a plowed up field will be marked, because here you have a case where the field was marked, and we're trying to figure out, was it a plowed field? Obviously, then, a plowed field will logically be marked as a beis hapras. Why are you telling me that you don't have to mark a field as a beis hapras just because of plowing? You only have to mark a field that is because of a grave. Not true. If it was true, then you wouldn't have this whole discussion. So the Gemara says, no, the situation here could have very easily happened that the field was marked because it had a grave in it, and then it got plowed. And now, the question is not where's the grave, the question is the grave has been scattered all over the place. So then it would be permitted to walk through it. It was marked in the state of having a grave. Then you couldn't have gone through it. Once it was plowed, now you can, if it was plowed. And that's what the brisa is dealing with. How do you know if it was plowed or not? So Gemara therefore says, and the explanation of the brisa is that if it had trees in it, you could assume that it was plowed because people plow up a field of trees. Gemara says, hold on a second. People plow up a field of trees. They only plow between one tree and the next. Maybe the grave wasn't between the trees. Maybe the grave was between the trees and the border of the field. And therefore it wasn't plowed there. So how could you assume that it was plowed and scattered and walk through it? So Gemara says, okay, so the answer is that the trees here are along the border. You don't have to worry about being between the trees and the border. The trees are along the border, and therefore plowing between the trees always happened. Says the Gemara, but not necessarily. Maybe they just plowed in a straight line from tree to tree, and the actual grave is deeper into the field. Right? If the trees are along the border in a row, so they plow from tree to tree, but the middle of the field won't be plowed. There's no reason to plow that. So Gemara says, well, first of all, it can't be, because then that would be the marker of the field would be too far from the tumah. We're making the marker all the way the edge of the field, and the tumah you're saying is only in the middle of the field. You wouldn't do that. And another approach is that we're talking about where the trees were scattered all around. They're spread out throughout the field, and therefore you plowed up the entire field. They're also going all the way to the edge of the property, and that's why you can't say that the grave is possibly outside of the plowing zone. And now the Gemara just comments on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda, you have to have somebody there to tell you. So Abaye says, you see from this that any Talmud Chacham that is in a city, you could rely on him for all the communal matters. He has to be involved in communal activities and arrangements for the city itself.